visit in 2010. So, and today I want to first talk a little bit about the fascinating history and the kings and queens who called Versailles their home first. And we're going to understand really what is the reason why the French hated this queen, Marie Antoinette, and why the kings wanted another yet palace, well, Versailles, right? Then we're going to have a look at what it was like to be living in Versailles, to follow actually the Sun King Louis XIV around in a day in his life in Versailles, so that you can learn the necessary etiquette, the manners, and so on. Then we're going to have a look at some of those most opulent and golden famous rooms, such as the Hall of Mirrors, the King and Queen's bedchambers, and the Royal Chapel. Finally, my favorite part of Versailles is actually the gardens, the beautiful French gardens. We're going to understand why it is such a remarkable revolution in fountain engineering, and to understand a bit of the symbolism. And of course, we'll talk about my favorite fountain. And eventually, we're going to finish the tour with a bit of a Q&A, and maybe we can share some of the tips, when is the best time to visit, how to visit, so on and so forth with you. So sounds good so far? Now, during our time together, I've also prepared some questions to get us engaged a little bit more. So these poll questions pops up on your screen, and you can click the answers. And these are anonymous. I won't know who answered what. It really doesn't matter. It's just a fun way to get, to engage all of you. So do you guys see the poll question coming onto your screen? Yeah, the first one is, have you been to Versailles? Anyone sees it? Yes, Cherry? Yes, all right. Anyone, are you able to respond to the poll question? I'm not getting too many responses here. I'm not sure whether there's a delay or what, but anyway, so this is how throughout our tour together, I have about 20 questions such as this that's going to pop up, and you can feel free to answer them. Yes, okay, I can see many of you told us that you can respond. All right, okay, so I think, interesting. I don't really know your vote, but I'm just going to go with my gut feeling that many of you actually have been to Versailles. Yeah. And for those of you who've been to Versailles, remember just how large we're talking about this place. Here we go. My next question for you. What do you think? How large is the estate of Versailles, the palace, the gardens, and the free park that makes a whole ensemble? It is more than 2,200 acres in size. The park, which is free, actually occupies the biggest percentage of the estate. It's about 800 acres. So it is a really good neighborhood for big families to settle, right? And but an establishment this size, of course, it was not built overnight. And what do you think? 300 years ago, when it all started, why was Versailles built? What was Versailles built as? Any ideas? Well, to answer this question, I'm going to show you a short 3-minute video that sums up the history of Versailles. All right, here we go. So Versailles is situated about 20 kilometers southwest from Paris. Today, it's a really easy train ride. It's about 45 minutes directly to Versailles. Yep. And it all started in the year 1624 when the French King Louis XIII, who used to go hunting in the woods of Versailles, had a small, humble hunting lodge of only 15 rooms built for his comfort. And when his son, Louis XIV, inherited this chateau, he started a 50-year project to enlarge this palace, and it became the largest palace in Europe even today. The first generation of architect, Louis Lavaux, had this genius idea of enclosing and expanding the palace by enveloping the original stone and brick chateau. And on the northern part, a series of rooms built for the king, and symmetrically on the southern part, a series for the queen. And on the west, overlooking the vast gardens, used to be an open terrace. But when the royal family moved in 1682, they realized this was really too cold. So the second generation of architect, Jules Monsat, transformed this open terrace into the Hall of Mirrors, which became the center of ceremonies and grand receptions. The same architect, Monsat, kept on expanding east and west, staples in the east, and wings for the ministries, and large square-shaped building for the kitchen and the servants. On a daily basis, there's about 10,000 people bustling around the palace and 3,000 courtiers housed in those rooms in Versailles. And during the time of Louis XIV, he also moved his bedchamber from the northern part of the palace into the center of his creation and facing the rising sun. He added the fifth, which became the final chapel, which overtowers all the rest of the building in Versailles. When he died, his great-grandson, Louis XV, inherited this place, but he actually did not expand Versailles much. He chose to fit out some smaller rooms hidden away from the public, which became the king and queen's private apartments. And he also added what was missing for the entertainment for Versailles, the Royal Opera House. So before COVID, up to 100 plays, theaters, ballets were put on a year for the public. And Louis XVI, the final king of Versailles, modernized the facade, but very soon the French Revolution of 1789 would force the entire royal family to leave Versailles and never to return again. So that was a really short 107 years history of Versailles, that we had 7 generations of Louis who resided here. So let me bring back the presentation here. So were you able to see everything that the video was sharing? Yes?
Not all of it.
Well, because this is actually our very first time, my first time to be doing this on Zoom. So technology-wise, I'm a bit nervous, and I just wanted to check with you guys to see if everything, we did some testing, but you know, with this amount of people. Yeah, okay, great, Ian. Thank you for your feedback. So that was the humble Versailles started as a hunting lodge, and eventually that became possibly the most famous palace in France. All of this thanks to this king, Louis XIV. So we've got so many Louis in French history, so we've got to come up with some nicknames to remember them better. Of course, we always remember them by their best quality, like Louis the Fat, or Louis the Flamboyant, or Louis the Bold, right, or Louis the Pious. And this particular Louis XIV, well, we remember him, one of his best qualities was actually his enthusiasm, his interest in dancing. So what do you think? What was his favorite type of dance? Well, ballroom dancing was a must living in any European court, but he was born passionate particularly crazy about ballet. He used to practice hours a day. As young as 7 years old, there was a royal gala night that was put on in the former palace of the Louvre. At the moment the sun was just about to rise, he appeared in the center of the stage that was elevated from the underground. And you see he was dressed in this golden costumes of the Greek god of sun, Apollo. Surrounding him were actually the sons of some of the most powerful noble families, and they were dressed in the costumes of the planets like Mars, Venus, Mercury. So he was making a grand statement at 7 years old that he is the center of the universe. He was the reason there is life, progress, and hope. So you see, a great Louis, and this is why the palace that he built is covered with the symbols of the sun. You see it on the gates. You see it on the paintings. So here you see a man with radiating light coming out of the hair. That is the Sun King's symbol. So Louis XIV lived in the 1600s, and while the average Parisian's lifespan in the 1600s was less than 30 years old, how old do you think Louis was when he died? Right. So just checking here. Are you guys able to see the poll? Because I'm not getting any like votes from my screen, right? But are you guys able to see it coming up?
It's all good.
Okay. So,
yeah.
For some reason, I'm not seeing
Yes.
any responses. No. So, but I assume that you're all giving me your best guesses. So he, right, was quite a special case. The average lifespan was less than 30 years old, and 1 in 8 royal children born in Versailles only survived to healthy adulthood. They all died because of diseases such as tuberculosis, measles, smallpoxes, and a terrible hygiene condition. And Louis XIV died at 76 years old, so he outlived his own son, his grandson, even so his great-grandson at 5 years old became the next king, Louis XV. In my opinion, this is the most handsome Louis. Louis XV became a king again at 5 years old, and he was married to Maria Leszczyńska at age 15 years old. Well, because here, of course, lineage is a very important issue. So he was married at 15 years old, and in the next 10 years, Queen Maria Leszczyńska was very productive, gave birth to 10 babies in 10 years. So while during the life of Louis XV here, he did not really expand Versailles in terms of structure. So, but he did something that really changed the lifestyle of Versailles. And he added a series of rooms to Versailles. And if you remember, what exactly did he add? Did he add the Hall of Mirrors, or did he add something for the comfort and privacy of the king and the queen? He actually added the private apartments for the king and queen, which are the shaded area on the screen. So prior to King Louis XV, the son King Louis XIV lived like in a 17th century reality show style, perpetually in public, from the moment of getting up to the moment sleeping, even when he is in toilet. We're going to talk more about this in depth. And all those activities would take place in the outer rim of the palace. You see on the border, so you see all of those rooms, therefore is known as the state apartments or the public apartments, where as long as you were dressed with a coat and a hat and a sword, you can go and visit the king for free, and the gardens too. If you don't have it, don't worry, you can even rent your hat and sword from the guards. So, and Louis XV, however, did not like that. He was a man who wanted some privacy. He enjoyed dining in privacy with his friends. So he added these private apartments for himself on the right-hand side, the northern part of the wing, and for the queen on the left-hand side. These are not rooms typically we can visit. Actually, I have never been to the private apartments of the queen. It was never open, but I've been several times, and I give tours of the private apartments of the king. So these are special tours that you need to book either through agencies or the palace itself. So well, he added on these apartments, and for a big reason, because well, he was someone who really was into fun. So he married Queen Maria Leszczyńska, who was 22 years old. 7 years older, but by now you should know, right? Frenchmen love cougars. So many good examples. My husband and me, Napoleon Bonaparte and his love of his life, Empress Josephine, right? That's kind of like me, Empress Josephine reincarnated in Chinese blood 200 years later. Another good example is our French president, Macron, and his 24-year-older wife. So Queen Maria Lerchinska, as I said, did an excellent job, 10 years, 10 babies, many girls. In fact, 8 of them were girls. And she and her girls loved music. She used to give these concerts on Sunday in those public rooms with her daughters. But when Mozart came to visit, it was not Queen Maria Lerchinska who received Mozart, but it was the mistress of the king. So why mistresses? Mistresses play such a big role in the court life of Versailles. Well, as long as the king chose from aristocracy ranking, it was always considered acceptable for them to take up mistresses. Well, particularly considering that the queen had already given 10 babies, the physicians warned her because of her last complicated delivery that the king should no longer visit her anymore at night. So what are you going to do? Being only 25 years old, well, of course, well, he turned to mistresses. And the legend is that the king had pretty much broken the record of having had how many mistresses here? Now, that's my next question here. The king had over 300 documented mistresses. And what do you think? Is it physically possible? Did he die from exhaustion? He actually died at 64 years old of smallpox. And it's true that he had over 300 documented mistresses. Not everyone became famous and enjoyed privileges, but this Madame du Pompadour is one of our favorite mistresses. She was intelligent and she reads everything from sociology to politics to economics. She used to hold salons in Paris, entertaining people from the literary world and political world. And she was also the face of the Versailles entertainment. And when Mozart visited Versailles, Mozart actually complained that this mistress of the king, right, Madame de Pompadour, was so cold and so haughty. She wouldn't kiss him. She wouldn't hold him up and kiss him, compared to his experience when he visited the court of Austria, where Marie Antoinette comes from. The mother of Marie Antoinette, Maria Theresa, the Empress Maria Theresa, warmly hold him up and kissed him on the cheek. So you really see that it's more than a gap. It's a big cultural differences among these European courts. So this is how Madame de Pompadour, right? Well, this is why we call Louis XV, the man who partied, who had lots of mistresses, the fun king. And the final generation of the king was Louis XVI, was also his grandson. And Louis XVI was the king who was married to Marie Antoinette, the famous queen from Austria. So why such an alliance? Louis XVI, well, in this lifetime of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, there was serious shifting of European alliances. Traditional enemies of Austria and France are now new allies against Prussia and England. So a bunch of royal marriages had to be made to consolidate this new alliance. And they were chosen because of their similarity in age, but also because of the beauty of Marie Antoinette. So we're going to talk a little bit more about Marie Antoinette in a moment. But Louis XVI was the king who had to face the increasing pressure of a financial burden of France. And he was born over 6 feet tall. He was strong built throughout his whole life. And he was a man, had very interesting hobbies as well. So any idea which one of this following hobbies may not be a kingly hobby? He loved reading. He had a huge library. And actually, in fact, when you visit the king's private apartments today, you get to still see a replica of his collections and his library and the big round table that he commissioned, because he had a love and passion for maps, for making maps. So he would have made a fantastic cartographer. In order to make it easy to read and plot maps, he actually commissioned the first round table. Prior to that, it was always a square-shaped table. And he also was the reason why we have Monsieur Laperose, Monsieur de Laperose, who was ordered by king to go on a 4-year journey and to explore, in the king's words, what the English captain James Cook had missed on his voyages. And interestingly, when Louis XVI was about to face his own death, the moment before he was about to get up to the guillotine, the last question that he had wanted to ask, he wanted to know was, do we have any news of Monsieur de Laperose? The truth is that the ship actually wrecked just shortly before the French Revolution. So he never actually get to see the results of his the voyage. So you can have an idea of what type of mindset this man was. And his absolute passion was also making locks. He loved everything related to locks, collecting them, making them, studying them. Instead of installing mistresses, he was the only king who did not take up any mistresses. And he actually installed a locksmithing workshop above his own apartments in Versailles. And so he, however, married to Marie Antoinette at 15 years old. Took him quite a long time to really find the key of his wife. But exactly how long? Let me see. Let me launch my next question. Exactly how long did it take the royal couple to have children? And that turned out to be a big problem for Marie Antoinette. One of the big reasons that she was hated in the court of Versailles. It took way too long. It took 8 years, their first child, and it wasn't even a boy, it was a girl. Madame Royale was born, right? The story goes that it became such a diplomatic crisis that the brother of Marie Antoinette, then Emperor of Austria, physically took an in-person trip to visit the king. The two men had a walk in the gardens. I don't really know what they talked about, but I like to imagine something with the brother saying to his brother-in-law that, Your Majesty the king, well, you know, you're the man, connoisseur of locks and keys. You ever get stuck with a lock, what do you do, right? I suppose one should be patient. Maybe you should try pushing the key all the way to the end and jiggle it. Jiggling always worked for me. What do you say about that? Well, apparently after this visit, maybe a sort of conversation like this, 4 months later, right, the queen was pregnant. And finally, he found the lock to his wife. It turned out that he finally agreed, Louis XVI had the problem called phimosis, and he finally agreed to have this operation to be carried out on him. And together they have 4 children for the next couple of years. So now you have it. We've got only 107-year history of 7 generations of Louis, but 3 only made it to the throne. And this is where, during this 107 years, Versailles became the permanent seat of power, where not only the court was held here, and the rest of the ministers all moved to Versailles as well. It became a capital town here. And so we can sum up the history with those 3 kings, 14, 15, 16. For 107 years, we have a saying here in France, if you ever have a problem, don't you worry, it wasn't going to last 107 years. So 14, 15, 16, the Son, Fon, Don King, right? Now, let's talk a little bit about the queens as well. Of course, Marie Antoinette is the most famous queen, and the most famous statement associated with her is, let them eat cake. But did she actually say it, or was it some really brilliant 18th century fake news? She, in fact, never uttered this statement, let them eat cake. This was all propaganda against her. She was 14 and a half when she came to marry Louis XVI, and she was the 15th out of a large family, 16 children from Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. And she had to spend 2 years preparing, grooming herself for this marriage, including studying French, getting her teeth corrected. She had to wear braces. She had to learn all the names of the courtiers, and she also had to learn, how to behave according to the etiquette of Versailles. And when she spent that 2.5 weeks carriage journey, crossing Austria, from Vienna to Paris, there was an official handover ceremony. So it was on the border between Austria and France. 2 pavilions representing 2 countries were set up. She was asked to go and completely strip herself naked. And even her puppy, she had a little puppy called Mobs, had to be taken away from her because she was supposed to give up everything Austrian, even her mindset and identity, because she is going to become the French Dauphine. Do you think it happens just like that? Getting yourself undressed and changing into a French dress and crossing the line? Of course not. She had a hard time adjusting to the life of Versailles, well, partly because more than half of the court were against this alliance. The daughters of the previous king, if you remember, the 8 daughters from the Fun King, many of them did not like her and gave her one of the worst derogative nicknames, and it's represented on the right-hand side image here. And even though many of the courtiers did not have a friendly impression of her because of her Austrianness from the enemy country, but many of them commented and were impressed by her smile, right? They said that her smile was very charming and very warm, and they also very much appreciated her skin, very pale white, that was considered to be very valuable for women. And but life was hard, especially because of the men that she married to, right? After these 2.5 weeks journey, when he arrived, meeting her husband for the first time, Louis XVI spent more time and was more interested in looking at his feet than looking at his beautiful new bride. He was extremely shy, bordering autistic, didn't like to be in public, likes to be alone, locked up with his locks and books. He was also very indecisive, always changing his mind according to the counsels he was getting. But he was loyal throughout his life, though. And well, this was therefore not an easy place for Marie Antoinette to survive, with the hostility and her mission to produce an heir with a cold and indifferent, well, almost impotent husband. So therefore, a lot of people started to make fun of her. And so which one of these nicknames do you think was actually her nickname? In fact, the daughters of the previous Fun King, right, called her a female dog, in French, la chien, from Austria. So Austrian female dog became l'Austricien. So kind of like a female dog, or so fitting for, which is of course very demeaning. And she also had a reputation of spending money very elaborately. Particularly later, she built a Hamlet for herself. So we're going to talk a bit more about it. So she was also known as Madame Deficit. And Madame Veto was because when she was in prison during the French Revolution, she voted veto on every single law that the Republic was drafting, and therefore getting herself the nickname Madame Veto. So I just wanted to now show another video, which I think does a really good job to show you the kind of culture shock that Marie Antoinette was suffering when she arrived in Versailles. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. I think. Okay.
Yes.
1 second, coming.
Nice mountains.
Entry may enter at
Famous
any time,
cherry blossoms
so
of
you
Paris, but the
must
earlier
pay
version
attention.
that we get.
Oops.
Let me take you to see that.
Okay.
Just a little bit of sunlight.
All right. I'm not sure
A select few.
where I have that sound from. Okay.
It was a good movie.
It was a good movie by Sophie Coppola. Trying to figure out how to share the screen with
Let's
you
get
guys.
lost again. Let's go
and
back
I
this
don't
way.
even know where the sound is coming from. I'm also hearing it. Found it. Okay, so here we go. My apologies. This was just a YouTube autoplay after the previous clip of Versailles history. So here we have. Okay, do you now see the new screen, guys? This is the, yeah, thank you. All right, here we go. The new screen is Marie Antoinette. It's a clip of, so voila, that's Versailles. Welcome to Versailles. So it wasn't easy for a 14-and-a-half-year-old teenager. And let's come back to our presentation here. Please do let me know if you had trouble. We'll be able to see inside Versailles. Yes, Debbie, we're going to see inside Versailles in just a few minutes. So she had a passion for having eccentric dresses as well as hairstyle. She had this particular good taste for tall hairs. That's called pouf. And it was so tall that even her carriages had to be remade so that she can be seated rather than kneeling on her knees. And to celebrate the American Revolution that was hosted, a big party at Versailles, she decided to wear a special outfit that calls for the occasion. Which one of these outfits do you think she wore, particularly her hair dress, A, B, or C here, A, B, C, D here? And well, you can just let me know what you think in the chat as well. So she actually went, let's see, anyone guess right? Yes, Lynn and Pat, exactly. So she went with the sea, a ship, as a France sent 16 ships to support the American independence cause. So a ship on her hair, how appropriate. She had $3.6 million US spending power in today's spending power as a budget for her wardrobe, for dresses and shoes. And she would overspend them, sometimes as many as twice. And her husband would cover the gap. And she purchased 4 pairs of shoes on a weekly basis. And she went frequently escaped for these masked ball parties in Paris. And this is also where she encountered an affair. So this man was Count Fersen. Count Fersen was a Swedish ambassador in the court of Versailles. And they did not have just a fling. In fact, they had a long-lasting relationship. Rumor even says that the final boy, the child, the future king of France, Louis XVII, may even not be the blood of the king, Louis XVI, but Count Fersen. So, but that is, again, court gossip. So the relationship lasted for over a decade, and Count Fersen was the only brave soul that during the very difficult times of the French Revolution, when the whole royal family were imprisoned in Paris, that he came back and organized a rescue, but which eventually failed, resulting the royal couple to be brought back and put in prison and trialed for treason. So the reason why they were guillotined very soon. So all of this show you that Marie Antoinette did not want to conform, did not want to compromise. She wanted to be free, and she remained free to herself. And this is why she had attracted lots of hatred, jealousy, envy, mostly from the aristocracy at first, and then from the rest of the population, right? Eventually, she changed when she became a queen mother. 8 years later, when she became a queen mother, she was reminded of her own childhood, the simpler upbringing in the court of Vienna. So she actually constructed a folly village, this peasant village called the Queen's Hamlet that consisted of 12 cottages. She imported even peasants, had real animals, like today you can still visit those goats, cows, wild boars, and she was spending most of her time here and only inviting people she liked to hang out here. Well, this is a fantastic place to visit. It only opens at 12 in the afternoon. So it's a bit of distance from the Palace of Versailles. It's about 20 minutes walking, but I highly recommend it. And in the future, I would also love to just dedicate an hour in talking about the queen and her way of life in Hamlet. But now moving back to what life was like in Versailles, this was the opposite of this free wandering in this Hamlet peasant village, like a Disneyland for her. This was actually a day very much structured, filled with ceremonies and rituals. And we're going to now follow the King Louis XIV in his day of life, starting the moment from waking up to going to sleep. So I am going, before we go and look at the day of Louis XIV, just want to ask a couple of questions. And the next poll coming up, there are 4 questions. You can just have a guess, answer them in a row, and we'll see if your guess is right as we go and follow the king around in the palace. This is an animation that's designed by Versailles. I'm going to share a new screen with you, and we'll spend about 5 minutes time on this. And here we go. So hopefully you can see this new screen. This new screen is the journey. Yes, the journey, the day of the kings. You see an animation. I mean, you see cartoon characters in the background of the palace. Right? Is that what you see, guys? Now, hopefully. All right. So the day starts at 8:30. The first person who comes into the room of the king was his wet nurse, his nanny. Well, up until the king in his 50s, she was the only woman authorized to come into the room to give the king a biz on the cheek for him to start his day. And the doctors, the faculty member, the priest would come in. And this is also when the king could receive privileged guests while he's using his commode. It's actually quite an expensive ticket, 6,000 French livres to purchase to have this privilege to be with the king, right, on his commode in this privacy with the king. And as the morning continues, his bedroom will be filled with up to 100 male courtiers who will come and see the king getting dressed, getting shaved every other day, and getting cleaned with this dry bath. So a piece of linen, a cloth that would be soaked in alcoholic or spirits to rub his body. And the king would also have a simple breakfast, usually broth, in front of these 100 male courtiers. And this is how he starts his day, with this grand waking up ceremony. And each piece of clothing is like what you see in the clip of Marie Antoinette, is delivered by the most higher ranking prince in the court, which all are considered guarded privileges. So all of this was set up in a way to show you that the king, the host, right, can do anything in front of you. You are almost nothing to him. So he can even use his toilet in front of you. Right? And now as the day goes on, at 10 o'clock, there is a procession leaving from the king's bedchamber, passing through the hall of mirrors as the king goes to mass every day at 10 o'clock, half an hour with God. And the king would pass hundreds of courtiers and visitors. If you get lucky, you might just be able to have a glimpse of the king, or even pass a little paper petition into his hands. So when he arrives, well, the king and his family member sits on the upper level, the tribune, while the rest of the courtiers, depending on their ranking, will be seated beneath, some sitting, some standing, some kneeling. And every day, Lully would compose a new piece of chapel court music to accompany the mass. And after the mass, 11 o'clock, it's time to get work. He holds council every day, Monday to Sunday. This is usually about 2 hours time. He has about 6 secretaries and ministers who work very closely with him and delivers reports. And of course, he reads many police spies. All the correspondence letters in Versailles were opened and checked by the police of the king. And this is how at about 1 o'clock, it's time for lunch. At lunchtime, it is supposed to be a rather intimate setting. Sometimes he would invite his younger brother Philippe to join him for lunch, but lunch is also quite long, almost an hour long, because he usually has 3 to 6 courses, and each course is 4 or 5 dishes here. So you would have roasted meats, and salads and soup, and all of this brought in on the table in the bedroom of the king, facing east, appropriate for the Sun King. And after the meal time, it's afternoon activity time. He goes out to the gardens or hunting at 3. But between mealtime and 3, usually he's got 1 hour, 2 to 3. He's usually spending that hour in visiting his mistresses. So 3 times a week, the king would go hunting in the woods of Versailles or in Marly. And he was said to be an excellent hunter. The year before he died, at 75 years old, the record says that he actually took down 34 pheasants from only 37 shots. Yeah, only 37 shots, if the record is reliable. And he loved water fountains and gardens. In fact, the garden area was his own brainchild. Working with the architect and fountain engineer, he designed the garden himself, the symmetry, the symbolism, the statuary. He even wrote a book called My Suggested Itinerary to Visit My Gardens, which consists of 7 different itineraries. And so it's quite interesting to maybe follow one of his itineraries to visit the gardens. Around 6 o'clock at sunset, it's time to return to the court. This is entertainment time. Usually he would give the task of organizing parties to his own son. So 3 times a week, there would be parties called the Soirée des Appartements that would be held in the palace. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, these are the party time. From 6 to 7, you would be treated to unlimited drinks, play pool with the king, and of course, ballroom dancing, gambling. And don't forget to try the famous hot chocolate. The queen of Louis XIV loved the hot chocolate so much, she drank a lot of them during one of her pregnancies. And this is why she said when her daughter was born, so would turn to be a chocolate-colored baby, right? Well, at least that's what she said, right? And at the end of the evening entertainment, around 10 o'clock, this is supper time, dinner time. He usually has dinner with his children, prince and princesses, and his queen. And the rest of the courtier, again, are invited to come and watch this spectacle. So 45 dishes are brought in. The valet, right, also brings in the nef, which contains his napkin, the knives. These are closed to prevent potential poisoning. And also to prevent potential poisoning, the valet would go and taste each single dish. So, and after supper time, well, he usually spends some time with his family in the nearby cabinet. And from 11 o'clock, we have the opposite of the sun rising. The sun is retiring. So this is the retiring to bed ceremony to close the day. It's like the morning, hundreds of courtiers file into the room, and the king would discreetly whisper to the valet, who will have the ultimate privilege at the end of the day to be the candle holder, meaning the last person to leave the room in the presence of the king. So, and imagine that you are one of those courtiers. You have to wake yourself up, get yourselves ready, and be there for the king, well, to see the waking up ceremony, follow the king around for a day, and you can only go home after the king retires. How exhausting it is, right? Just to hear all of this. Imagine doing it day after day. So why would Louis do something so exhausting to himself and to others like this? Well, because why? Because he made sure that everyone would be circulating around him, serving him, with him as the head of the monarchy. So he turned all those courtiers, right, those vassals of the country, into courtiers. He domesticated them. This is how he made sure that these ambitious vassals would not have the energy to go against him in his back, but they would try to fight against each other for his attention, for the privilege, for the hope of more power, right? And this is how his clever game is played in Versailles. All right, let's go back to our presentation here. So how do you feel now after following the king around for a day? Well, this was only a few minutes, but he lived like a clock like this for almost over 20 years. So this is why his descendants, Louis XV and so on and so forth, they did not have, they couldn't tolerate such lifestyle. And so they had built these private apartments to escape. So moving on to see some of the most beautiful rooms of the state apartments, these public apartments. So the first one, I'm going to actually go through some of my favorite rooms because of their historical relevance. So I have a couple of questions prepared. Now, the first one is that which room do you think is the famous peace treaty in Versailles of 1919 that was signed? This was the treaty that signaled the end of World War I. So which room do you think was big enough to accommodate all of those hundreds of dignitaries and politicians? So it was the Hall of Mirrors. The Hall of Mirrors was the site where June 28th, the Treaty of Versailles was signed. And the Hall of Mirrors originally was only this open terrace, but as it was too cold, it became a corridor that connected the king's apartments with the queen's apartments. And it's called the Hall of Mirrors, of course, because of these precious mirrors on 17 arcade-shaped panels that welcomes the light from the west. The mirrors were extremely rare commodity and extremely expensive. One piece of mirror this size today is sold over 10,000 euros because the Republic of Venice monopolized the manufacturing of these mirrors. And a piece of that at the time of the 17th century would have costed you 3 Renaissance masters' paintings. So the most wealthy person in the world can only afford iPad-sized mirrors. Imagine, even if you can buy several of them, you will never be able to have such a space where as you walk in, you get to see your entire body reflected in one piece. But I imagine most of the courtiers would be so shocked at how they look like. They must be thinking that I must go on a diet right away. But it's a bit hard because you come to Hall of Mirrors to party, right? You come here for the weddings of the prince, or you come here as a ambassador, right? To have this reception by the king. So when you are given the reception here, usually the king would have his throne set up on a platform at the end of the Hall of Mirrors. Every 3 steps as you go towards the king, you had to make a curtsy. even when you leave the room, you cannot turn your back against the king. So you have to keep your eye on the king and walk backwards. And every 3 steps, make a curtsy, make a bow. So of course, if you are not tour guide, leaving the room is a lot more difficult. It kind of feels like Michael Jackson doing his moonwalk out of the room. So now, don't be fooled that Louis XIV actually never paid for those mirrors. He actually had those Venetian mirror makers stolen, right? So risking their lives, actually came to France to manufacture these mirrors in France. And a great rivalry in terms of export with Spain and Italy because of the demands of Versailles in terms of painting, right? Nationalistic paintings by the French painters, in terms of the production of porcelain, chandeliers, fabrics, and all of that. So it was, and even perfume, right? All of these were great boosts to the industry of France because of Versailles and because of the reign of Louis XIV. So now next question is about Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was a guest at Versailles twice. On his second visit on March the 20th, 1778, so he was received by Louis XVI in the most formal room possible, because he came here with 2 other dignitaries to openly solicit the help by the French government. So which room do you think he was received? It was in the most formal room of the entire palace, of course, the king's bedchamber, right? This is where the king goes to use the toilet with the courtier who pays the ticket, right? And the king eats and retires. So this is where he was received. And if you look at the decor of this room, right, so every inch speaks of opulence. The fabric around the 4-poster bed and on the wall, this is the most expensive fabric in the world. Is called, it's a type of manufacture that's replicated today in the same manufactory that provided it 300 years ago, situated in Lyon. This is the Tassinari fabric. You're looking at real gold, solid, 99, and melted down into thin thread and woven with silk. So we don't have any original fabrics from Versailles because during the French Revolution, these precious materials were completely recycled. About 80 kilos of gold were recycled, extracted from the curtains, the fabrics of Versailles, and the furnitures, many decorative arts, so were actually resold. Queen Elizabeth became the biggest collector of the original furniture of Versailles. So now, moving on to my next room is the Queen's bedchamber. So the Queen's bedchamber is also the most formal room in the Queen's apartment. And apart from receiving her audience and receiving her guest at waking up ceremony and so on and so forth, this is also a place what do you think? Do you think this is possibly also the place where the Queen gives birth to the prince and princesses in public? Is it possible? Is it even bearable? Well, as a mother, I find it completely unbearable, but it was true. 19 princes and princesses were born here, and 2 of the queens died here in this room in public. So living in Versailles as a member of the monarchy, you don't have any privacy, life to death. So everything you live in public here. And speaking of Mary Antoinette, she was narrowly saved by the store on the left-hand side when a mob of angry market women stormed Versailles in October 1789. So this was only 3 months after the outbreak of the Bastille Day. Because of starvation, lack of bread, and about 10,000 market women, mostly women, they voluntarily marched from Paris all the way to Versailles, and they chanted outside the gate that we want to see the king, we want to see the queen. So while the king convinced that he was going to give what they need, which is bread and all of that, and when the king and queen retired that night, a branch of those radical rioters broke into the palace in the middle of the night, and they stormed before Mary Antoinette, they went straight to the queen's bedchamber. Luckily, the Swiss guards of the queen did a good job in defending her, and many of them were decapitated with their heads put on a spike, put on makeup, and the queen was saved because of this door on the left-hand side of her bedroom, which connected through a series of corridors to the king's bedchamber. So this is the private connection, not the public Hall of Mirrors connection. So because of this door, her life was spared that night. But the following day, the whole royal family would be forced to pack up everything, and with their body heads bleeding, decapitated head on the spike outside the window of their carriage, they were forced to leave Versailles for good and never to return again. And since then, no royalties ever resided in Versailles, the Palace of Versailles. So my final room to share with you is the royal chapel. The royal chapel is constructed in such a way that it has got 2 levels. Why? The king, of course, sits on the upper level. And if you look at the nave of the ceiling, right, so you actually have the Trinity on the same line. Far in the distance, this is Jesus resurrected. In the middle of the nave, you have Father. So speaking of Holy Trinity, of course, what's missing is the Holy Ghost, which is represented by white doves. And guess where the throne of the king is? Directly beneath the white dove, as if he was called out by God, chosen by God to be given this special right to be above everyone else, to become God on earth. And this is why he puts himself on the top, and the rest of the court is beneath him. And this is also where royal marriages were held in the time of Versailles. I mean, in the time of the kings. Mary Antoinette and Louis XVI were married here in 1770 in another ceremony. And 300 years later now, we have another American couple who wanted to follow the footsteps of Mary Antoinette and Louis XVI. And they wanted also to be married here. They came to Paris, and they had their baccalaureate party on the Eiffel Tower, their a brunch next day in a chateau, and they came to Versailles and they wanted to be married right here in the chapel, right? And of course rejected. They're not French. No, I'm kidding. Well, nobody can be married here. And they don't hold services. This is also where concerts are provided in normal times. Any idea which American couple asked for permission and got rejected? Now, they also have 5 kids now. And so this is Kanye West and Kim Kardashian. So these two strolled Versailles with designers' clothes and Marie Antoinette style carriages. And yeah, so what a way. Now, finally, my favorite part of the palace is the gardens. So, and speaking of the gardens, of course, the fountains is very famous, but a big misconception for the visitors who've never been to Versailles. They think they can see fountains anytime. It's not true at all. It's only on display 3 days a week. It's Tuesday, Saturday, and Sundays. 3 days a week, and when it's on display, it's very short, 30 minutes in the morning and an hour and a half in the afternoon. Why is that? Because we're talking about a original historical fountain setting that still uses the 17th century fountain engineering. So Versailles was a place where there was no natural source of water. So in order to get all the supply of water, rivers were rerouted, machines were made, such as this one, Machine de Mali, that consisted a dozen of gigantic wheels that pumped water and then send them by miles of aqueduct and to be stored in the reservoirs on high grounds. Today, there's still 2 functional operational reservoirs in Versailles because of the slope, right? Because of gravitation, because of hydraulic power. So the water cascades down through the pipes, and when the switch is turned on, it releases the water jets from the fountains. And this is how it is still run today. Even the 300 kilometers underground piping system is the same. It is regularly maintained and cleaned. Therefore, the water display show is very rare. So there are about 15 major fountains spread around the whole gardens. I won't go into them. My favorite one is the Latona fountain. You will miss it. As long as you start walking towards the gardens, you will see it. It's right there in the center on the perspective. You notice the French gardens, like Versailles, is very symmetrical, organized. It's like manicured topiaries. So this is another way to say that there is a hierarchy. There is a hierarchy in this God-created world, and man is definitely above nature, who's in control of nature. So the nature is displayed at the will of man, and who is in command of all the man? Of course, that's the God-chosen king, right? So in the gardens of Louis XIV, you have this absolute control and order, and in the center of that order universe, you have the Latona fountain. This comes from a Greek mythological story. And Latona is this mistress of the god Zeus, the most powerful god Zeus, who gave Zeus two children, Apollo and Diana. Apollo became the god of sun, Diana, the goddess of moon. The story goes from the book of Metamorphoses by Ovid that one day, as the three of them were traveling in a village and the children were thirsty, they wanted to drink water from a clear stream. The moment they were about to do that, the peasants in this village, very rude, and they started throwing stone to the river, making the water all murky. So angry Latona called out Zeus, and Zeus came and turned those rude, rebellious peasants into, as you see, these transforming them into frogs and alligators and turtles. So this is not just a decorative piece of statue here. This is a big warning, reminding you what happens to you if you do not metamorphose yourself for your king. You are going to be metamorphosed by your king, and you're going to become one of these bottom dwellers at the end of the water, never to receive the grace of the sun anymore. So that is pretty much the whole demonstration of the power or the glory of the Sun King in his garden and in his palace. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today, of course. Thank you very much for bearing with me during this confusion of the technology, new technology for us. And I hope it was nevertheless clear. And if there was any questions, please feel free. I'm watching the chat now, and I would love to answer any of your questions. And I think before we go into the details, thank you very much, Pat and Lynn and V. Thank you very much for your comments and support. And before we go into into your questions, I'm just going to pass this time back to Ferret, who has a few things to say. Go ahead, Ferret.
Can you hear me? It's fine. It's working.
Yes.
So so thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed the tour. Yes, so take the time, ask any questions. We had some issue as well with Zoom, so I couldn't read the questions throughout the tour, but I had some good feedbacks on YouTube as well. We are happy to start this experience, to try to do these webinars online, and to have these more and deepened experiences than what we were usually giving spontaneously when we're going on site and traveling in France and in other places than Paris. And this tour, they as I was saying to you at the very beginning, they exist to bring us as a community of travelers, and we try really to promote an amazing content. We are going to try to work on our presentation, on make things working, make things smooth all throughout our tours. And I really would like to thank you, Josephine. And if you would like to thank her as well, there is a really simple tipping functionality that you can have that she's going to share the link now on on the Zoom chat, but you can find it back on the presentation of the video when you go on Facebook. So if you have any questions, that's your time, and feel free to ask her anything about life, about Versailles.
Okay, so I have actually some private questions coming in. Glenn asked me about the Grand Masked Ball. So yes, and in the summer season, there is usually in June, that there is, I think this year I checked, it's called the Fête Galante. I think it's May 31st in 2021. So they plan to hold this. It's a party that you are required to go with a dress code. You're required to dress in a 18th century outfit. Otherwise, you will be denied entry. And it starts at sunset, so after 11 p.m. And it goes all the way next morning until sunrise at 6. So you get to enjoy fireworks, you get to enjoy food. There's many different levels of tickets that you pay, you know, the Duke's ticket, the Marquis ticket, you know, gives you different access to enjoyment. Yes, Glenn, so that's the one. That's the one for you to really live the spirit of Versailles. So if you want to, you know, feel as a courtier, right, to be partying, to be having champagne, yes, it's a lot of fun. I have not been there myself, mostly because, well, it's quite a dedicated job to get yourself a nice outfit. You know, you can rent it, of course, but you need to go fit yourself for it. And yeah, but I definitely will go one day. So last year we actually went to the Fountain Night Show. So Fountain Night Show is happening every Saturday in the summer months. And this is also amazing. You get to see all the waters on display from sunset all the way into night. And the finale is at I believe it's at 11 p.m. or 10:30 with a 15-minute long firework. We actually live streamed the firework on our YouTube, on our Facebook channel. So you can see that on our Facebook channel and YouTube channel. So yeah, wow. It's I also made a video so on it. So that's playing on Facebook. It's to be very honest, I was very pleasantly surprised. I thought before I went, it was rather a cliche, you know, do I really need to do that? But when I went, you really feel like you were transported to a different world. So it's very exciting. Any other messages, questions? There's a question about springtime fountain. Okay, yes, okay, this is a question from Barry, springtime fountain. So yes, in the coordinates of the gardens, so there are 4 fountains, and so in 4 corners, these are the seasons, so spring, summer, winter, and fall, and each is represented by a Roman god. Spring is represented by Ceres, the god of flowers and the flowers. Spring is represented by Flora, the god of flowers. And yes, it's actually, I remember in 2019, as we were touring, they were repainting the gold leaf over this particular fountain, and it's absolutely stunning. So all of those season fountains have been repainted and brand new gold leaf and colors on it. Absolutely stunning. Yeah. The sculptor of this fountain, I'm sorry, this name definitely escapes me. Yeah, but it's really interesting also to realize those sculptors, I mean, the fountains are represented by the god, and even the god, the statues are designed in such a way they actually call out to each other, like in the fountain that represents fall, which is the time of harvesting, which is the time of winemaking, and